All right. All right, everyone. We're on episode 24 of the Conquer the Mind podcast. I'm very, very excited for today's guest. I've honestly been talking about it for quite some time now with Colette Bell of Ace Handyman Services. So, Colette, thank you so much for joining me today.
Oh, I'm honored. Thank you for inviting me.
Yeah, of course. And basically, the last couple of episodes, Colette, I know you've done the rounds of podcasts on the franchising world. If people don't know Colette's backstory, there's a lot of great podcasts out there that are more than happy to kind of dive into Colette's background. But your background is very, very interesting. So I still want to kind of guide some questions to kind of dive through your background, if that makes sense. I think there's a lot of value between some of the decisions you made kind of leading up to being a business owner, getting into franchising. I think it really relates to a lot of people that are considering franchising. Dennis Schooley on episode 1 alluded to over 70% of people consider business ownership. And you and I know it's probably less than a percentage of people that actually take those next steps. So I would love to kind of dive into the head of Colette and see what was the decision-making process to eventually lead to massive success that, we see today. So Colette, I'm very excited to kind of dive into it. So for anyone that doesn't know, a brief background on Colette. So Colette, feel free to correct me if I mess up anywhere along the lines. But Colette, she's been a franchise development. She's been in franchising for nearly 20 years at this point. She graduated from college, and her husband were kind of looking for that next step, and they eventually became business owners. And it wasn't like something they were always really looking to do, but something they found a need in society and found a way to really provide value to people in their community, and eventually scaled a business into a franchise model, which, it's hard enough to become a successful business owner, let alone a successful franchise. So that's going to be a whole nother story. And eventually in 2019, that franchise was acquired by Ace Handyman, which is where we see today with Ace Handyman Services. Incredible brand recognition. One of the funny things, I actually moved to a condo in Miami and the key actually says Ace on it. And, those are the type of, the goods, the services where it may not be, the sexy thing that people are thinking about with McDonald's, Subway, Taco Bell, but it's something that everyone uses and people may subconsciously be even using it. And that's something where people in franchising, they're not looking to sell necessarily, but they want to be a business owner. It's a good way where you're just helping out that community. So Colette, they were acquired by Ace in 2019, and she's honestly a frequent speaker at different franchising events. I just listened to her at the Steve Beagleman event a couple months ago, where she was a speaker at a roundtable discussion going all over franchising. So Colette, how is that backstory of your background? How did I do there?
That's perfect. You did a great job, Josh.
All right, awesome. So Colette, a lot of times, I think, especially for me personally, starting the podcast, very lost when I graduated college. I have, a business degree, but no sense of, even what the stock market is, really what business really is. So you kind of feel very lost. And I understand for you, Colette, you graduated with an English and a history major. So can you kind of walk us through, like in college, you're graduating, what is like the mindset? Like, what are you thinking is going to be, your career?
Yeah, that's such a great question. And actually, Josh, I have a kid who's probably close to your age, which is sad to me, but I have a 23-year-old who said the same thing. Why didn't
Yeah.
they teach us basic business things in high school or college? He's like, I don't understand what happened here. But I graduated, you're right, with an English and a history degree. I was going to be a teacher.
Mhm.
My parents were teachers. It was just, one of those things where when you're a little kid and somebody says, what do you want to be when you grow up? And you say, I want to be a teacher. And that's pretty much it.
Yeah.
When I got to that point of graduation, a couple of things sort of shifted that footing for me. The first one was um, Andy Bell, who's my husband now, but back then we were just dating. He got on with the restaurant group and got transferred to Florida. And he said, hey, maybe you should come out to Florida and just see what it's like. And so I moved out, got my own apartment. My dad was horrified, but nonetheless, that was old. Yeah, those are olden days, right, Josh? And there was a hiring freeze on teachers in the state of Florida when I
Mhm.
moved there. They just didn't have the budget. You're in
Yeah.
Florida, it still is a really big struggle in Florida.
Yeah.
So teaching was not an option for me. And here I had this, great English and history degree. I don't
Yeah.
even know what you would do with that if you weren't teaching, honestly. So, just got some regular jobs and
Yeah.
started just sort of doing whatever I needed to do. We moved around a lot with the restaurants. When we came back to Colorado, and I tell people this all the time, it's amazing how much it is to be lucky, right? Instead of good. Sometimes you just can't plan things out. You've got to take advantage of luck. And what happened when we moved back to Colorado, they also were not hiring for teachers, but I found what was then a franchise concept. I didn't even know, I don't even think I could spell franchise. But it was a franchise concept called ExecuTrain. They were headquartered out of Atlanta, Georgia. And what they did was train business people on how to use computers. So it was teaching, but it was in the realm of technology, which I just, boned up on a couple books and said, okay, I think I can do this. So that was really my first introduction into the world of franchising. What does that mean? What does it look like? Right. I flew to Atlanta for the training. It was all these things that years, fast forward years later, I was like, oh, that's what was going on. So that's what I was doing when Andy and I finally decided to make the shift and start our own business. So
That's incredible, Colette. You dropped a lot of really powerful things there. And, I think for a lot of people growing up, I know for me personally, the question of what do you want to be when you're older was one of the toughest questions, especially, you go to like the Christmas, the holiday parties, every relative, everyone related to you is always like, what do you want to be? And it's like, well, I'm in school, just having a good time, not really sure any idea. You get the business degree, you get a teaching degree, and you think, you're meant for business, you're meant to be a teacher, but you may not necessarily have the skills to be successful in that department. And then a really great point with the tough hiring cycle, like very similar to me graduating in the fall of 2020 during COVID. Literally nobody was hiring. The only companies that were really making profit were the financial institutions, and they still weren't looking to hire people. So I feel like you can do all these different things, but there's still going to be an outside factor. So I really like the point of taking advantage of luck and finding those opportunities. I'd be curious, what was it like? You moved to Florida, it's a tough hiring cycle. You probably worked the last couple of years to get a nice teaching degree. You feel like that's what you're going to do. What do you tell someone that, they have these expectations of, they feel like everything's set in stone, and then they have this life event that kind of changes the outcome? What was like your mindset, decision making of like, how do you pivot? How do you find that next step? I'm sure you're probably worried, concerned. What was kind of like going through your head then?
Yeah, my dad was none too happy either, right? He paid for an education and a teaching degree, and none of that was being put into place.
Right.
I think, I'm sure, Josh, when I was in it, it was stressful. And it was a little bit unnerving, right? Because you make these plans, and the best laid plans can get diverted by either moving somewhere, like you said, with the pandemic. I think what I found in myself, and I think this is what I see in franchisees that join a franchise model at all kinds of different stages of their career, is that you're able to take a half a step back and say, this may not be what I planned for, but how can I still use my knowledge, my skills, my training to make the best of the opportunity that I have in front of me? It may not be the opportunity I set out for, but how can I rally? And I tell people all the time, my dad was frustrated when I didn't teach. He was frustrated when I didn't use my degree after we started the business. And when I do presentations in front of large groups, and somebody will come up and say, oh gosh, you're such a great speaker, I will say, that's thanks to my dad and his communication degree that he swore I was never going to use. But I do. I use it. I do. And it's unfortunate he's not here. I tell him that all the time, even though he's passed away. But, I think and I think this is part of the struggle with college in general and education in general. And certainly I'm very passionate about people pursuing a career in the trades, if that's a better fit for them. It's really not about a specific job title. It's about learning skills and education and experiencing different things. Like you were saying, I'm just going to college. I'm having a great time. I'm meeting new people. I'm learning about myself. I'm learning about the world. I think it's being able to take those opportunities and translate them into whatever is in front of you in terms of different jobs or pursuits or things like that.
Yeah, that's really powerful. And I think just taking it step by step, I feel like for me personally, I grew up always wanting to be a business owner. And I think I grew up with a lot of people that had that similar idea where, they put their name on a shirt or something like that, and they can just start selling it. But you got to focus on, what's in front of you, developing those different skills so that you can eventually be a business owner. And franchising is so powerful where you don't need every skill in the book. You don't need an Elon Musk type idea. You literally just need to figure out what you're passionate about, where you want to go, and then you can take those next steps. And I think another great point that you mentioned is not analyzing exactly what's in front of you, because that may not be, the fifth or 10th step. A lot of times when
Right.
people are considering franchising, I feel like they're looking at what that annual income is going to be on like that single unit, but that's not the end game by any means. These franchises are equipping you with the skills to be an entrepreneur, to be a business owner, whether you want to scale it to multi-units, acquire a portfolio of brands, or even just sell it and take on those next steps. You're going to have those skills to be successful. So I think that's really powerful, Colette, and something I wanted to touch on. So kind of going back, you and your husband, Andy, trying to kind of figure everything out. And I think it's powerful. He was in the restaurant industry, similar to my father. And I feel like you either fall into it, you have family, or you're in the restaurant industry and you want to figure out an easier way so that
Yeah.
you're not working nights, weekends, holidays. Can you kind of walk us through what the day in the life looked like for you and Andy when he was in the restaurant business? And what was that mindset kind of going day by day, 100 plus hours a week or something like that?
Yeah. Yeah, right. I mean, restaurants are great for eating people up and spitting them out, especially at the management level. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
They're very time intensive. There's lots of employees to make a restaurant operate properly.
Mm,
Andy, his last stint here in Denver, he was at Brew Pub. And this was
mm,
before, again, I'm old. This is before breweries and local breweries really became a big deal. This was one of the largest in the United States. They brewed 5,280 barrels, which of
wow.
course is mile high to fit with Denver. Really big deal. And so he used to go in at, 8 o'clock in the morning, do some paperwork, check on inventory, see if all the shipping of the food and things came in and, do some of those things, do some hiring. He'd come home in the middle of the day. He'd go back by 4 o'clock and it was a bar.
Mm,
So, he'd be home at 2 o'clock in the morning.
yeah.
And, I think restaurants are interesting because they do offer people a lot of different business acumen abilities, right?
Mm,
There really is
yeah.
everything in a restaurant, right front and center. You've got the back of the house, the front of the house, and customer
Mm,
service and inventory and cost management. It is a really great education.
mm,
But it's hard to be a family person, and that's really what switched for us. He'd done restaurants for a long time. He liked them.
yeah.
He liked the energy and the chaos, and that really fit his personality. But when the baby was on the way, we were like, man, that's going to be a bummer, right? You're
Yeah.
working nights and evenings and holidays, and it just
Mm,
where are you going to be? You're not going to be able to be a part of your child's life, and so that's really, I think, where we both woke up and said, we got to do something different. We got to make a switch. So
that's so funny. And it's so interesting. I feel like a lot of like the veterans in the franchising industry, they came from restaurants, hotels, and those, if you can learn the restaurant and the hotel business,
yeah,
everything else is like a step down in terms of the complexity. Employee, everything you just mentioned is just so complicated. The employees, yeah, it's dealing with food,
hospitality.
storage, supply.
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
it's a whole nother animal. So that's really interesting. And now you're kind of in the restaurant industry, you're starting to make that transition. What was like the thought making process to the evolution of Handyman Matters?
Yeah, it didn't just come to us overnight. I can promise you that. So we were having dinner with a couple of friends of ours.
Yeah.
And and I think a lot of people who are looking for a switch in their lives and maybe considering franchise, I know they've done this themselves. You sit
Mm,
around and you think, well, I could do this, or I could do that, or I could be this, or I could be that.
yeah.
And so our friends just asked Andy, all these different things are on the table, but really, what can you do?
Mm,
Like, what would you say is the one thing that you're really great at? And it
yeah.
was such a silly answer, Josh. But here at the brew pub in town, there were about 50 swamp coolers on the roof. And for folks who don't know what a swamp cooler is, it's basically a poor man's air conditioner in a dry climate. So here in Colorado and Arizona and Nevada and places like that where there's no humidity in the air,
Yeah.
instead of putting in a full air conditioner, you can put this crazy, it looks like a little squirrel box that sits on top of a roof.
Mm,
And you put it into the venting, you have a fan in it, pulls air over a wet pad. And when it pushes that wet air into the place, it causes it to cool down.
mm,
And so there's a couple problems with it. One, it's on the roof, which
yeah.
is always a problem. Two, it has active water, which means if the float isn't set right or whatever, it's overflowing on your roof, which means that it's
Yeah.
on your walls and it's a big mess. And so Andy kind of, tongue in cheek said, well, I can fix swamp coolers. And all of a sudden I kind of looked over at him and I could see the wheels in his mind going. And he said, wait a minute, I can fix swamp coolers. So he's a big thinker. He's a visionary. So like literally that next Monday he went out and like you said, he got t-shirts, right, with a
Yeah.
business name, called himself Swamp Boy International.
I
He
love
went and got he went and got, that swamp thing of the Black Lagoon or whatever. He went and
it.
got one of those pictures. And he put our telephone number in the newspaper because that was the advertising. There wasn't even websites really. And the phone started ringing off the hook. People needed their swamp coolers fixed. And so he'd answer the phone all morning and he'd book himself out all afternoon. And when he went to the appointment, he was on time and he was in his logoed shirt and he was very kind and helpful to people. And he'd go up there and he'd fix their swamp cooler and then he'd ask them for payment. And a lot of times before he even got to the end of the street, they were calling him back saying, wait, do you do drywall? Can you fix my door? I need to have my bathroom tiled. And it was just constant. So he came home and he said, I don't understand what's going on. Why do these people need all this stuff? And I said, do some research. That's pretty much my answer to everything. So he did. He took the phone book and he called about 200 homeowners just randomly and said, do you have a handyman? Where'd you find him? What do you like about him? What don't you like about him? And then he started trying to call contractors because even back then they didn't have a category in the phone book of handyman. Everybody was under contractors.
Okay.
And of course, those two sides of this business model basically wrote the blueprint for the plan. Homeowners said, I can't find anybody to do small things. They're unreliable. They don't show up. They don't communicate. If something goes wrong, I can't find them in a day. And contractors were saying, we're not going to do the small things. We're just not, I'm not going to go fix a door. I'll go replace 40 doors on the inside of a house. And so really the business model was just sitting right there in front of us. So he said, I think we need to do a handyman business. And I said, well, it's certainly better than Swamp Boy International because I don't know what you're going to do in the winter. There's not going to be any swamp coolers in the winter. But I said, the biggest problem is you can't do all those things people are asking, right? My husband was great at swamp coolers, but he couldn't finish drywall. He didn't lay tile. He said, nope, Colette, I want to build a business that I work on, not that I work in. And I can find the people to do this work and I can help them by being the front end customer service and then they can just do the tasks. And that's basically what ended up happening.
That's incredible. And where was this business getting started? Is this in Colorado right now?
Yep, we're in Colorado.
Okay.
Literally started the business in the basement of the house. He went out and got a couple sawhorses and a blank door that didn't have a doorknob so he could feed his computer cords through it. And that was about it. We were just kind of off and running. So
Oh my God, that's awesome. That's literally an incredible story. So you started like a handyman business. Your husband was in the restaurant business. You were really kind of in the teaching industry.
yeah.
What kind of gave you guys the confidence that you could start like a handyman business? Did you have prior like tradesman skills or did you ever learn any crafts or how did you start to be like, how did your husband even say, I can fix swamp coolers?
I know. It's so funny. You look back and you just kind of shake your head and said, what, I guess maybe youth and naivety fed into some of, oh, we can do this. This will be no big deal. Now, we tried a lot of things that were stupid, that did not work, by the way. They were bad ideas. But I think, and this is what I look for when I talk to people who want to start a franchise. What we had back then, for whatever reason, youth or ignorance or whatever, we had passion that this was a good business. Not so much construction. I'm not very passionate about construction, but what I am passionate about is helping people. And that component of helping a fellow human with something that they're struggling with, even if it's not that big of a deal in terms of the house, but they're struggling with it, to be able to go in and fix a problem for somebody and do it well and make them happy, that's the passion that really pushed the business forward for both of us, honestly.
Yeah, that's a really, really great point. Anyone that's thinking about a business idea, being a business owner, trying to look at society and find ways where you can provide value. I think a lot of people think about a business idea very internally, what's really great about me? How can I, monetize this rather than looking at society, what's happening and how can you help a lot of people? And, through Ace Handyman, we were kind of talking about the key that I use for the condo. It doesn't
Yeah,
necessarily need to be like this crazy, a lot of people think like food, like these big industries, but you find value, a service that people continually use, and then you
right.
provide, the resources that a gives you. It's a very powerful system, in my opinion. So I think that's really interesting. And I want to dive into, you've kind of mentioned your family not really necessarily kind of giving you the full confidence to be a business owner. And, similar, I think a lot of people, when they're thinking about being a franchise owner, they're looking for that validation from other people. They're going through the steps, they're meeting with maybe a broker, a franchise developer, but they're still asking their friends, a loved one, their family, relatives. Sometimes I think people, a lot of times, if you're not in the franchising industry and you're hearing someone talk about the idea, it's very easy to poo-poo that, say no,
Right.
think of all the different reasons, or, maybe someone has their own, like a mom and pop hardware
Yeah,
store, and they're making the similar comparisons to if you owned a franchise model. And it's not even close in terms of that comparison. Very
right.
obvious. But how does someone, they don't have that confidence from those around them, but they
Yeah.
still feel like internally like they're meant for something greater, but obviously they don't want to take that risk, if everyone around them saying you're going to lose money, don't do that. How does someone like
Right.
get the confidence that this is something they're meant to do, if that makes sense?
Yeah, yeah, that's a great question. And it's really hard when and again, I lived through it, when you don't
Yeah.
have support. My dad just thought we had lost our minds, right? We were having a baby.
Yeah.
We had both quit our jobs. We had started this crazy handyman business in the
Yeah.
basement. Probably for 6 years, Josh. Every time I saw him, he'd say, "When are you going to get a job?" And I'd say, "Dad, I have a job. I'm building a business. It's okay. I got this." I think the key is you have to have at least one person in your back pocket who does believe, whether that's a spouse or maybe it's a cousin who's also done franchising and has seen the opportunities.
Mm,
But you're right, franchising is not, people know the famous concepts in franchising, right?
mhm.
McDonald's and Subway and
Yeah.
Dunkin', and people are familiar with that, but most pedestrian people know very little about the world of franchising, the opportunities it brings in terms of, an operating plan and all of the materials that you need to run your business and to be in business with other people instead of be by yourself.
Yeah.
And those of us in franchising know the statistics, right? People who
Mhm.
start a franchise survive at a much higher rate than people who start their own business. But it is hard. And I think it's not just like family and friends. I think CPAs
Mm,
sometimes don't understand franchising. They've never heard of
yeah.
a ROPS program, right? They don't know that you can actually legally roll over a 401k without fines and interest and penalties. They've just never heard of it. And so they think it's a bunch of hooey.
Mhm.
And so it's
Yeah.
interesting because you almost feel like at every turn, you have to be just super adamant that this is a real industry. It does exist. It's regulated by the FTC. I talk to people about that all the time. That
Yeah.
wasn't always true, right? Franchising started in the 20s with Ray Kroc and the Arby brothers and Minnie Pearl's Chicken, right?
Yeah.
And Colonel. And it was not regulated by the government for 50 years. There were a lot of backdoor cocktail napkin, promises made where people lost money. And when the FTC finally stepped in the 70s, that's when this became a much better opportunity for consumers because you have a governmental agency overseeing how this is actually operating.
Mhm. Yeah, that it's a really good point. And yeah, I think franchise, there's just so many regulations that people aren't aware of, and nobody knows, what an FDD is. And some people will even pretend, you ask them the question, and a lot of times candidates think it's like a trick question where I'm trying to like test them or something. They'll be like, yeah, yeah, like I know what that is. And they don't know what it stands for. They don't know anything about it, but it's really not a trick question by any means. And another thing that people don't understand about franchise is the validation part of the process. I talk to a lot of people that are hesitant to even start the process, and they tell me, I'm just going to call local franchise owners and see what their day in life looks like. But they don't understand there's a regulated process where you're going to speak to all the franchise owners. And one franchisee story is one franchisee
That's
story.
right.
Rob Flanagan told me that. And I think it's just really powerful advice because every person has a different story, different reasons why they got there, and their reasons and why they're kind of continuing why they got there, it's going to be probably very different from your reason. So I think that's very powerful. And so Colette, very big on the Conquer the Mind podcast of having kind of the why, kind of like that big picture. I'd be curious, as you kind of became business owners, you're launching Handyman Matters. Was there like a big picture at the time? Did you have like a long-term vision where you like, did you know like I'm building up an asset? That's another thing people don't necessarily consider with franchise, that you're building up an asset that you have control over compared to like a 401k where you really have no idea where that money is going. Was there like a long-term vision for you and your husband when you originally started Handyman Matters? You kind of alluded to you're having a family now, you want to have more balance in your life. I'm sure that's part of the decision-making process. Was there like, were you picturing your life in 3 to 5 years when you made that decision?
Oh, I would be lying, Josh, if I told you that we were. I can tell you a couple things. That
Yeah.
one of our main goals in being in control of our business life
Hmm.
was that we had flexibility to be the kind of parents that we wanted to be. And we were.
Hmm.
I'm super proud of the fact that, we raised two boys. They're now both out of college. We were the parents that went to every baseball practice and game, right? Because we could. The
Yeah.
business ran on software. We could have an iPad while we were sitting there watching all the practice happening. I remember when both the boys graduated, and you're kind of talking to other parents at the graduation and stuff. And the most common thing I heard from people was, it went so fast. I wish I had spent more time with them. And I can
Hmm.
remember going home and telling Andy, I don't have to say that. I got to
Yeah.
spend with my children that I wanted to spend while still participating in a business, while still seeking out financial independence. That was really huge for me. And I think you're right about talking, just calling up and talking to different franchisees. Everybody has a different thing that they want
Yeah.
out of this business, right? Some of them are very financially driven. That's
Hmm.
fine. If that's what people's focus on, and that ability to build that asset and potentially exit, there's nothing wrong with that. Some people are much more on our side of the house, where it was all about flexibility and control. I didn't want to have to put in for vacation time every spring break. I
Right.
just didn't. I just wanted to be able to go when I wanted to go and not worry about those kinds of things. So it was really the flexibility. For my husband, I can remember a day. It was one of those crazy, crazy days where, the phones are ringing off the hook, and you're talking to guys and everything's going bananas.
Yeah.
And my husband was literally standing in the middle of the basement downstairs, and he said, "We're going to be the biggest handyman business in the world." And I looked at him and I said, "Not if we don't make payroll this Friday." He was the visionary, and his
Yeah.
goal has always been to make a legacy impact on the trades. Uh, he
Hmm.
got very passionate about the craftsmen. He got very passionate about giving them a career path,
Yeah.
good pay, health benefits, 401k programs, all those things that he felt like were severely lacking in the world of the
Hmm.
trades. And so that really was part of the conversation when we were talking about Ace Hardware, right?
Yeah.
Obviously we weren't ready to be gone, right? We're starting our 5th year being a part of this and running it for Ace. But what Ace provided to my husband was a bigger stage and a louder microphone, right? How
Hmm.
can we continue to make a legacy impact on the trades now that we have a big brand name like Ace Hardware behind us? So
Hmm. No, that I really love that. And I liked how you were going to your kids, baseball, whatever sport it was, going to their games, very similar to my father when he transitioned from the restaurant industry to become a single unit owner of a dry cleaning franchise, scale that to a multi-unit franchise. Like I have very vivid memories of my father and I going to the baseball field before any game, doing batting practice, pitching to him. He was at all my games, double
yeah,
headers for AAU, then on to the next sport with basketball, double headers for that,
right.
3 day long weekends. And as you alluded to, you have control over your schedule. And on top of that, you're building this financial independence as well. Because I think a lot of people that come in, people have different reasons, but the financial people, they're looking at that annual income, but just understanding, that's just one step. You can scale that to whatever it may be. You're definitely not limited in terms of financial independence by any means. So,
That's right. Yeah.
Colette, I understand, you have Handyman Matters. You're starting to evolve it into a franchise system. You also have a lot of experience at SMB advisors helping other businesses start to franchise that model. What was it like when you and your husband decided we're going to turn this business into a franchise model? I think a lot of people, if you have a successful business, that's more than enough for people to be happy. But you wanted to franchise it and kind of give this opportunity to other people, which I think is really powerful as well. what was that like starting to franchise that?
I wished I'd had S&B back then, Josh. That's part of the reason why I participated with S&B, because I'm like, oh my gosh,
Yeah.
like if I could get a shortcut, just like franchising is supposed to give people a shortcut to starting their own business, S&B
Mm,
gives franchise concepts an opportunity to get started in a better format, because we really did kind of flounder around in the beginning. The whole driving purpose for going into franchising in the first place was we believed we had a business model that would work everywhere. Anywhere there's a house, you need a handyman. We believed we had a business model that customers across the United States deserved. They
mm,
needed it and they deserved it. And we believed we had a business model that would be a good career path for craftsmen. What we didn't have was a financial way to do that corporately.
mm.
We had our locations in Denver, which we had expanded to 3. Before we franchised, we started 3 more company locations in California, because
Yeah.
it's a W-2 business and you got to try, California's tough. So we're like, well, if we can figure it out there, we can probably figure it out anywhere. But once we hit those 6 locations, we'd really tapped out on finances. We didn't come from any kind of private equity. We didn't have a whole bunch of money saved. We were really young back
Right.
then. And so we said, geez, how can we really make this be the world's biggest handyman business? And the franchise model was perfect for that, because you could work hand in hand and shoulder to shoulder with people in their local markets, which handyman's very local. You could get their input, because Andy and I have never been the smartest people in the room. We have managed to surround ourselves with super smart people and gain their ideas to make this a better business model. And, we've got some franchisees that are signing their third 10-year agreement this year. Been with us since '04. Now they're going to be joining us, starting their 21st year. It's remarkable. But they've brought a lot of the great ideas into this and really helped formulate it to be what it is today. So I think it was that passion that this is so good, it shouldn't just be in Colorado. It really should be all over the United States.
Wow, that's awesome. You kind of answered one of my next questions. I want to shift into Ace Handyman pretty shortly, but I was one of the questions I was curious about with your decision making to start franchising. It's either kind of like you franchise or you raise capital, but I think you kind of alluded to having those boots on the ground in those local communities, having those relationships, having that very collaborative environment. So I think that's really interesting. So I'd be curious, those first couple franchise owners compared to
Yeah.
kind of where you are today. What was it like trying to find those very first franchise owners? Did you know what you were looking for in an ideal candidate, or what was that process like?
We had no idea. I mean, again, we tried everything. We
Yeah.
did sell to a couple of people who were very construction oriented, because that seemed logical.
Yeah.
It turned out not to be a very good model for us, because what we found was if a franchisee could do a drywall patch and that was their comfort zone, that's what they would do, is go do drywall
Mm,
patches.
yeah.
And if you're at one customer's house, you can't be talking to potentially 30 customers at a BNI meeting. So they got themselves really stuck working in the business instead of on the business. If you don't know how to do a drywall patch, you got to hire somebody to do it, because customers are calling for it. So you go, I don't know, I need to get more people on staff. So we did go with a lot of hospitality folks in the beginning because of Andy's background, and
Yeah.
a lot of the way that we wrote the materials and thought about customer service was very hospitality driven. So it resonated with a lot of people who come from that industry. So that seemed to make a lot of sense.
Mm,
Uh, in fact, one of our franchisees who's in Maryland and just signed his 21st year agreement, he's from restaurants. So it kind of made
okay.
sense to him. But I got to tell you, in the beginning, you're really just trying to sell a dream. You're selling your dream for
Yeah.
this becoming nationwide, and you're selling the local dream.
Mm,
And if you're not, you got to be passionate about that, but you got to have something to back it up. You got to have some materials, you got to have some good training products,
yeah.
you got to have a well thought out marketing program, some of those things. So yeah, it was definitely a very different experience in the beginning compared to now. So
That's so fascinating. And that's something I kind of tell candidates when they're looking at maybe a newer emerging brand.
yeah.
You're not going to have as much validation from other franchise owners, but really what you should pay more attention to is the founder and the CEO and what's their big picture vision, what's their track record. And as you can see, you have a very strong track record, a very strong vision. You can kind of see, are someone looking to franchise to collect that initial franchise fee, or they're looking to actually build a business and help other people out. So I think that's really interesting. So I'd be curious, as you decide to create this business to become a franchise model. Now you're finding candidates. There's a lot of new emerging brands, and I think the number is there's 300 new brands every year and 300 fail every year. Um,
Yes. Yeah.
so, there's a lot of emerging brands. We kind of talked about the regulations, but candidates evaluating an emerging brand. Do you think all businesses are meant to franchise? Can all businesses be successful in other areas? Or what gave you like the confidence that Handyman Matters had that business model that could be replicated in different parts of the country?
Yeah, that's a great question, Josh. I think if I were talking to somebody who is evaluating an emerging brand, and it's hard to do, especially with really passionate visionary people, but
Yeah.
what you have to try and figure out is the success of this business because of the business and the process and the procedures, or is it because of a personality? It's
Mm,
really hard to recreate a personality. In fact, it's
mm,
probably impossible. And I say that with a recognition that my husband has a very big personality. And he
mm,
was a part of the reason why, especially in the beginning, we were so successful. He was just so outgoing and told everybody we had a handyman business. And I couldn't go anywhere without him handing out business cards and just everything. But when we were able to recreate the business in California without him being there on a day-to-day basis, we just hired people, brought him to Denver, did some training, sent him back, and the business model still worked. That was our ability to say to people, yeah, this guy is passionate and wacky, and it all started from him. But the business is something that can be replicated without the personality side of it. Because a lot of entrepreneurs and founders are very strong personalities,
mm.
but not every franchisee is going to be able to, be that kind of a personality in the marketplace to make it happen. So.
No, that's super interesting. I'd be curious, a lot of people in franchising, they kind of have like that 100 units is like the magic
Yeah,
number.
yeah.
You found success in California. I'd say that's probably a very big milestone of validation. Was there like a moment for you when you and your husband were like, all right, Handyman Matters, this is a successful business, this is a successful franchise? Was there a moment, because I'm sure you're going through a lot of fear as you're building this up? Yeah, you still have the confidence, but was there a point where you're like, yeah, this is legit, if that makes sense?
Yeah. Yeah, I think our first couple years in franchising, we chose intentionally to grow very slowly because we
Mm,
knew we didn't totally know what we were doing and that we were going to make mistakes. And the problem with making mistakes when you're franchising is you're risking other people's money, right? People who've invested and expect you to have all the answers, or if not have all the answers, to be able to figure them out pretty darn quickly.
mm,
So we grew very slowly about the first 3 years. Once we felt like we had some momentum in 2000, so we started franchising in 2001. In 2004, we felt like we had it.
okay.
And between 2004 and 2005, we grew by like 60 territories. It was a lot of growth. It was probably too much, but it was crazy. That was the point where we said, okay, we got it. We hit over the 50 mark. We felt like, we were going to be around. We weren't quite at what they call royalty sustainability, meaning your royalties coming in are paying your operating expenses.
Mm,
That's a really big deal. And Shelley Sun, is kind of the first person who wrote a book about it and started talking a lot about royalty sustainability in the world of franchising
mm,
with her Bright Star Senior Care. But I think for us it was over 50. That's when we felt
okay.
like, we transitioned to the next level. And it's about that stage where, if you have a franchise concept that looks like it has some legs, you'll start hearing from private equity and,
Yeah.
people will start calling and we entertained a couple of conversations, but the whole private equity experience, my husband calls it black heart capital. It just never resonated with us. First of all,
Yeah.
we were still young. This is all we've ever done. We're still here, even after Ace Hardware. We really don't feel like we're finished per se with
Right.
the goal. And so we wanted to make sure that whatever the next phase was for us, that we could stay as involved as we've always been. So.
That's awesome. And now you kind of mentioned private equity. In 2019, Handyman Matters was acquired by Ace Hardware. Can you kind of walk us through what that acquisition was like? What was the decision-making process? What was the due diligence that went into that? How long was that process?
Yeah, it was long and it was hard, right? For a business that starts in the basement,
Yeah.
you could say that our record keeping was probably not on par with the big like Ace Hardware. They called out of the blue in 2018. We didn't have the business up for sale. We weren't planning on doing anything like that.
Mm,
But Ace Hardware was seeing a shift in their consumers who go into their hardware stores from prevalence of do it yourself, right?
mm,
Go in, get a little piece of widget, go back, make your own repair, to more customers that were coming in looking for do it for me.
mm.
I need to change my toilet flapper. I'm looking at your aisle. There's like 20 different toilet flappers. Who's going to help me with this, right? Who's going to
Yeah.
actually come to my house and do this? And so Ace Hardware decided in 2018 they needed to see if they couldn't figure out that answer. So
Mm,
they called all the handyman franchises that were around in 2018. We happened to be one of them. Andy answered the phone, and this very nice guy named Bill Guzik said, "Hey, I'm the CFO and Vice President of Operations of Base Hardware,
mm,
and we're wondering if you'd like to have a conversation about a potential partnership. We don't know what it looks like."
mm.
And Andy said, "I can be on a plane to Chicago this afternoon," because Ace had never called, right? We've been
Yeah.
doing this for like 20 years, never heard from Ace. And Ace is different. It's not a private equity. They're a hardware company. They're celebrating their 100th year this year in business. And yeah, it's crazy. And Andy said, we got to go talk to these people and see what's going on.
Mm.
And what they were looking to do was take that crazy jingle of theirs, right? Ace is the place with the helpful hardware folks,
Yeah.
and take that helpfulness to the house, right? Bringing helpful home is technically our tagline. So he flew to Chicago, talked to them. I think what the moment, Josh, that for Andy, he said, this is the direction we should go, is when he walked in, beautiful corporate office, when he walked into this beautiful corporate office in Oak Brook, Illinois,
Mm.
down the hallways are pictures of Ace employee faces. They call it the faces of Ace.
Okay.
And then you get to this one wall that has all of their values
Mm.
aligned on, big words on the wall. And one
Yeah.
of those values is love.
Mm.
And you just don't see that from corporate businesses very often.
Mm.
So Andy said, I think we're home. I think this is it. So we went into due diligence about the middle of 2018, took a year. Right? They kept
Wow.
calling and saying, do you have this? I'm like, I don't know. Probably. Right? Like, I don't know. I'll do my best to go find it. I don't know. But during that year of trying to find files, we had a lot of conversations with them about what is this going to look like if it actually happens. And Andy's first question is, well, it really had two main questions. What's going to happen to our corporate people? Because it's
Mm.
very important. We've had them join our family. They work really hard for our franchisees. I don't want them to just get a smile and a wave and you're going to take everything to Chicago and we're not going to have anything. And
Mm.
what's going to happen to the franchisees? Because they
Yeah.
are family to us. A lot of them joined us when they had no good reason to join us. So,
Yeah.
and Ace, was very clear about, we don't know services. We know hardware. We don't know services. We'd like you guys to stay involved. We'd like you to keep everything in Colorado. We don't want to take anything away from you.
Mm.
And we want to just bring more resources to your franchisees instead of less. And, we took a little bit of a risk because, people say a lot of things during a due diligence conversation. But, we're starting our 5th year and Ace has done everything they said they would done, and they've not done anything they said they wouldn't do. So it's kudos to, a very big, large organization. Could have easily absorbed our marketing team into their marketing team. They didn't.
Mm.
We still have IT, we still have operations, we still have development. So they've been a very good partner in this process for sure.
Oh, that's so fascinating. It really just seems like such a natural collaboration between the two. Just thinking about Ace Hardware, it's kind of ironic that they sell all this stuff, but there's no one to actually do the work for them. And
Right.
nowadays, I feel like all products, services, it's all about convenience, bringing everything to the customer,
Right.
especially home services, make things more convenient. You don't want to use 3 different people when you're trying to
Right.
accomplish one task. So that's just really powerful. It seems like such a natural fit, and it's really interesting that the culture shift still maintained that same culture, and honestly, probably even elevated the culture. It
Right.
sounds like to a certain extent. So I'd be
Yeah.
curious, that relationship, that acquisition happened in 2019. So, before 2019, there was a lot of growth in, stocks, businesses, whatever it may be. Then 2020 hits, and that's when, a lot of the mom and pops, unfortunately went downhill because they just don't have those resources. How powerful is a relationship like Ace during those kind of down cycles and being able to support those franchisees?
Yeah, huge, right? I mean, they're a what, $100 billion organization. I mean, a little up and down fluctuation in the economy is like a gnat to them. And Andy and I talked about that. If we hadn't have had this opportunity, and if for whatever reason we hadn't have gone through the acquisition, would we have survived the pandemic? Now, there were some winds of fortune when it comes to home services in the pandemic. One of them was it happened in spring, which I know seems sort of weird to people, but as a handyman company, we could work outside.
Mm.
And of course, because people were stuck at home, they wanted their outdoor spaces to be improved. So we spent a lot of time early on in the pandemic working for homeowners who were home, but we had the protection of them being in the house and our craftsmen being outside the house,
Yeah.
and be able to do a lot of that work. I don't know what would have happened if this would have happened in November, right?
Mm.
Where all you could do was interior work across most of the country. So very fortunate about the timing, very fortunate that people couldn't spend money on cruises and
Yeah.
trips and you know what I mean? Those kinds of things. And so they chose instead to spend money on their home, which a lot of
Mm.
people hadn't done up to that point. Um, and that trend has certainly continued for, well beyond the impact of the pandemic. So, and then of course, being with a nationally recognized brand name like Ace,
Mm.
and Ace saw an extreme increase in business in their hardware stores because they were listed as essential
Mm.
at a much greater rate than even Home Depot and Lowe's did because people believed an Ace could be cleaned.
Yeah.
Nobody ever believes a Home Depot's been cleaned, right? It hasn't. Not since they put all that crap in there has that Home Depot ever been cleaned. So when people were still very concerned about it coming across the virus or that exposure, that kind of stuff, they were more likely to go to a smaller store where they felt like somebody would be concerned about doing, all the cleaning and desanitizing and things like that was possible back then. So
Yeah.
Ace saw a huge increase in business. We saw a huge increase in business. And really, the last thing is because they were so busy, they kind of left us alone, right?
Mm.
Maybe even if they were thinking about doing some things, they didn't have time because they were all caught up in the pandemic. And by the time they circled back around, we had grown so much, they were like, just keep going. Or we'll leave you alone. You're doing just fine. So
No, that's so funny. In Home Depot, that's such a funny point. I picture like the pallets stacked on top
yeah.
of each other in each aisle, like 20 yards high. So you can't see the next aisle. You have no idea where you're going. You
Right.
can probably walk around for 30 minutes without even seeing anyone.
Seeing anybody, right? Yeah.
Oh my
That's right.
God. So Colette, one of the things I really like having people do is, for someone that is living under a rock, they have no idea what Ace Handyman is.
Right.
Give someone an idea of what is Ace Handyman, how are franchise owners actually deriving revenue, what are the goods, services, what is kind of involved in Ace Handyman?
Yeah, great question. So the way I explain our business is we're really not a construction concept. We're
Mm.
a problem solving company.
Mm.
So people have a home or a commercial space and something goes wrong. And it's usually not a big thing. I'm not talking about fires. I'm just saying, the drawer in the bathroom won't close, right? I
Yeah.
push it, push it, push it, and nothing's happening and it won't close. Or you have a house with cathedral ceilings and
Mm.
the smoke detector up there starts going off at 3 a.m. And you don't have an extension ladder that tall. And even if you do, nobody's getting up on it.
Mm.
It's really those sorts of small problems that our business model is intended to take care of.
Mm.
We want to be able to respond to customers very promptly, first by answering the phone. That's sort of a novel idea in the world of construction. So business 101, right? You
Mm.
spend money to market, you really should answer the phone, but it doesn't
Yeah.
always. So we answer the phone, we talk to our customers, we try and find the right craftsman with the right skills to get them over there as promptly as possible. And then we charge our customers in a time plus materials format. We don't waste time going and looking at things and writing up an overinflated estimate and then waiting for them to decide. We just simply show up, fix the problem, get out of everybody's hair. So our average project is 4 hours in length.
Mm.
Get a lot done in 4 hours. The average cost of a project is $650. So it's not a huge expense that a homeowner needs to come up with, not a lot of planning to make
Right.
something like that happen. And so we tend to have a very high repeat business. Usually the first year we'll visit our customers again about 30% of the time. And then as the business matures, that gets to be probably closer to 55% of the business is somebody who's already used you, right, for something else. Handyman has a very wide potential services, right? So you think about, there's some very specialized services in home improvement. Dryer vent cleaning. There's a couple of franchise concepts. That's all they do is dryer vent cleaning. That's a very niche market, right? It's very tiny. We as a handyman company do over 1,000 different things for people. And that's why the repeat business is so high, because we could come clean their dryer vent one time. We could change their smoke detector batteries 6 months later. We could fix some baseboard that the dog chewed up during the last thunderstorm, right? Like we can do all those different things through the same company. So we wanted to be a one-stop to help our customers out. So
no, that's awesome, Colette. And I was literally wrote down as you were talking what the repeat customers look like, and you answered that question right away. I think that's really interesting. I was curious when someone uses a service like that, how often they be going back. So that's really interesting. And as people, they're building a business, they're building an asset. You know, you build up those clients that rely on you. You're that face in the community that people know. So I think that's just really powerful. So a little bit kind of the ideal candidate for Ace Handyman. You kind of mentioned when you first started, maybe looking for more craftsmen to get started. Today, what is kind of the ideal candidate? Those, I would say like those top 10% franchise owners in your system. What does their kind of background look like?
yeah, it's crazy, Josh, but it's all over the board.
Yeah.
You know, we've got in our top 10, we've got someone who was previously a horticulturalist. I don't even know what that means, except he worked with plants.
I
Right?
was gonna have to ask you to explain
Yeah.
that one.
It has nothing to do with construction, nothing to do with business. He was actually a
Okay.
horticulturalist. We have franchisees in our system from a financial background, like Wells Fargo financial planning.
Yeah.
We have franchisees in our background in our system from marketing departments, so they love the brand name. I think that
Yeah.
was a draw for a lot of them. Plant management, so logistics is another big one. We have a very large contingency of veterans in our system. And so I think we just have so many SOPs, right? Standard of
Yeah.
operating procedures, that it really tends to resonate with our military. So a lot of them have come out and looked at our business model. We have husband-wife couples. We have single females. I just had dinner last night with one of our franchise owners from Atlanta. She's got two beautiful little boys that are 8 and 10. She's a single parent, running a handyman business. So it's really all over the board. I think what makes a successful franchise owner in our model is that desire to have your own business. You got to have an entrepreneurial slant to you, and the ability to positively impact your community. I really feel like ours is an and business. There's the financial side of it, there's the asset planning side of it, there's the income side of it, and there's a way to really make a positive community impact. We do a lot of volunteer work across our franchise system. There's a lot of people in everybody's community who can't afford a handyman. So if we can go work on their house for 4 hours for free and put in grab bars and maybe lower a transition so it's not a tripping hazard or whatever the case might be, there's lots of good ways that we can impact the community as well as having a very successful, profitable business model.
That's awesome, Colette. I love the different backgrounds of the different candidates. And it's always so fascinating. You know, it's really hard for a franchise to find that ideal candidate because it really is about, you know, you have some strengths, you have some weaknesses, and just having that confidence. I think, you know, you can be successful at anything if you just have that confidence, you have that mindset that you can be successful. And I know the hours are winding down. This has been a lot of fun, Colette. I appreciate your time today. I'd be curious, you know, I think you kind of alluded to the different candidates, the different backgrounds, but I think for a lot of people, they picture Ace Handyman, they picture Ace Hardware, they picture a big corporation. You know, we talked about private equity and kind of the stereotypes with, you know, the black cards, if you will,
Right.
and they're kind of like cold shouldered. You know, what actually makes up Ace Handyman? You know, who are the people that are actually in the community as the business owner of Ace Handyman? Is it a big corporation, or what does that kind of look like for, you know, you have an Ace Handyman, maybe I'm in Miami, there's an Ace Handyman, who's running that store? Is it, this big CEO sitting at the top of a castle, or what does it look like?
Yeah, no, our franchise owners are very involved in the ground side of this business. So going to the BNI meetings and going
Yeah.
out to customers' houses and thanking them. We still send, so old fashioned, Josh. I'm going to show my age, but we ask franchise owners to send their customers handwritten thank you cards after
Mhm.
every job.
Yeah.
It's something that, just doesn't happen that often anymore in our society. So we ask our franchise owners to do things like that. We want them to participate in the Chamber of Commerce and the Rotary clubs. We want them to go to the local Ace hardware store and have a craftsman put up a card table, right? And we've got a big stand that says, ask a craftsman, because sometimes people just have questions. They don't want to hire somebody to come do something. They're just like, would you do it this way, or would you do it that way? Because there are still DIY people out there. So how do we engage with the community where they're at when it comes to home improvement things? And we really want our franchise owners to be front and center, the face of that business.
Hmm.
People want to know, if I'm inviting you into my house, most intimate location that I have, and a
Yeah.
lot of times in the most intimate part of my house, my master bedroom, my master
Yeah.
bathroom, right? I want to know that I can trust who's owning this business and who's sending these people to me, so that I don't have to worry about them in my space, right? My one protected space that I have.
Huh. That's fascinating, Colette. That was something I wasn't even really thinking about, but you're really inviting someone into the most personal aspect of your house. So having that trust, you don't necessarily want to just hire that mom and pop where, there might be just 3 Google reviews, for example. You want to have
Right.
that confidence that, even your children, your dogs, they're in the house
Yeah,
too. You want to
everything.
have that confidence.
Yeah.
So, Colette, one final question for you as the hour kind of wraps down. I think you've recently posted on LinkedIn that about loving your career, loving what you do, and creating generational wealth. And I also posted on LinkedIn, and my why statement really comes down to very similar to what you alluded to, is the financial freedom, the lifestyle freedom, and having that impact on other people. And I think it's just so powerful. I think subconsciously or consciously, that's what most people are seeking out. Some people have their stereotypes with the financial part of it, but people are still working a job so that they can accomplish that. So what did that LinkedIn post mean to you? Why is that so powerful to you? And how is franchising and business ownership, got you all 3 of those things?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think it goes back. My mom gave my husband Andy a book early on. She was a little bit more supportive than my dad was with
Okay.
the whole start a business thing. She gave him a book that said, do something you love and you'll never work a day in your life.
Mm,
And that's really the theory that we have gravitated towards in our lives. I people ask all the time, what's been the switch from running your own business to now, selling it and working for Ace Hardware, basically as a W-2 employee, right? Total sort
mm,
of flip on its ear experience. And what I tell everybody is, I've been retired since we started this business, because what I do, I love what I do. I love
yeah.
talking to people. I love this business. I love the impact it makes. I love the other people in franchising. It's such a fascinating industry to me. So giving, so forward facing, so non-competitive. People just don't realize how non-competitive. I can remember so many times we'd be at an IFA event. You and I talked about that. And we'd be sitting with the founders of Mr. Handyman and Jeff from Handyman Connection, who still owns Handyman Connection, and just talking about what's going on in your handyman franchise. Here's what's going on.
Mm,
It wasn't like everybody was trying to keep secrets. We were all like,
yeah.
hey, we're in this together. Have you come up with a solution for X, Y, or Z? And what are you doing on that direction? So
Yeah.
I just feel like you and I talk to people every day who
Mm,
are making oodles of money
mm,
and couldn't be more miserable.
mm,
Couldn't be more miserable. They don't have control of their life. They're working themselves to a frazzle for somebody else's generational wealth, right?
right.
And the money doesn't make up for it. It doesn't
Mm,
make it all better. And so my greatest hope, and every time I talk to a candidate, my greatest hope is, no matter whether you choose Ace Handyman Services or something else, I hope you find what you love. I hope you find something where day after day after day, you can go and do it and you don't realize that you're working. You feel like you're doing something that fulfills you, that adds to you, right? Come from a position of abundance rather than, oh my gosh, I have to go do X, Y, and Z and, do this report or whatever the case might be. So.
Colette, that is a fantastic answer. And I really like the fact that you said that you've been retired because, once you find what you love, you'll never work a day in your life. And I think that's just a powerful lesson for anyone. Just figure out what your why is and how you can get there. I know the hours wind down. Colette, if you have to jump to another call, feel free to jump off. I like to just give like a brief summary of the call for everyone, kind of like those key takeaways for me. So I thought you brought up, this was so much fun. The 60 minutes really flew by. I have so many takeaways and your story is just so incredible. It really is really what the American dream is all about, becoming business owners and really helping these other people, creating that significant impact. One of the things you brought up earlier on the call is taking advantage of luck. Success is, you have to put in the hard work, you have to have the mindset, but you have to have certain things go right, certain things go your way. Some people work their whole life for something, but they never necessarily get that break. So I think when you have that opportunity, for me, I'm very privileged, I'm very blessed, but you still need to take advantage of those opportunities because there's so many people out there that have a lot in front of them, but they aren't taking advantage of those opportunities. And, the months, the years, they kind of fly by and you feel like you're still in that same position. And you also kind of mentioned not feeling like you're on step 100, you don't need to necessarily analyze that average income on a franchise, but you're going to be equipped with the skills to be successful. And you made that decision to jump into franchising to provide that balance for your family, create that good for other people. It's not just about yourself, but creating that lifestyle that you see for your family and going to your son's baseball games. I think is just so powerful where you have control over your lifestyle. And I also like when you had that passion younger and you kind of brought up how you were a little bit ignorant to a certain extent, very similar to my father as kind of a serial entrepreneur. When you're young, you're willing to take a little bit more risk. So I think it's just really powerful that you found that passion, that why. And, there is certain risk, but you're not going through the analysis paralysis. You have that confidence that you can be successful. And lastly, just the idea of having that one person that believes in you. I think it's so powerful where you feel like you're on an island a lot of times, but just network with other people, put yourself out there. There will be like-minded people out there. It may be hard to find, but if you just, with social media, send messages to people, put yourself out there, and eventually all it takes really is that one person to believe in you. For me, my parents have always been a strong belief system, and that gives me the confidence to be a business owner and take that risk. So I always think, just have that support system, that one person. So Colette, thank you so much for joining me on the Conquer the Mind podcast. If anyone liked this episode, you provided any value, like, share, comment, subscribe. Colette, thank you so much for your time today.
Of course. And I would say, Josh, if anybody's interested in Ace Handyman Services, to reach out to you. That'd be great.
Awesome, Colette. I appreciate your time today.
You bet. Have a wonderful day.